So everyone, thank you so much for coming back for part two with Tiffany. Um, Tiffany does not really need an introduction. She is amazing, CEO of Tibetan. So I just want us to remind ourselves what we learned in the last one, which was the importance of the power of we, and then that you are a unique individual and everything that you need is within you. You are the driver of your own destiny. So Tiffany, thank you so much for being here again. We really appreciate you.
Thank you for having me back. And I am really excited for part two because we had so many questions from part one. So thought I would come back and share a little bit of my story and dive deeper into the questions and even see if there's some new questions. So shall we get started?
Yes, let's do it.
Let's do it. Okay. Well, I'm going to start with some pictures actually. And I noticed in the Q&A, there are quite a few questions regarding my experience and how I stayed motivated and what it was like. So I thought before we get into the questions, I would start with a bit of background. So for those of you who weren't able to make it to the first session, my entrepreneurial career has spanned 52 countries, 35 years, 7 startups, 2 of them went public on Wall Street, and a patent. And, you know, I was also, and I had mentioned this in the first session, the first of my family born with all my civil rights because I was born in the 60s. And if there was any doubt that I was born in the 60s, actually, if you go backwards to the very first picture, that proves it. So that's me as a baby with my mom in 1968. And those were crazy, crazy times. So the first few pictures are me as a kid. And I was like any kid. Next picture. That was my first boyfriend, Billy Ortega. It all went downhill after that. Next picture. You can see some of my birthday parties. Next picture. One picture in particular, which proves that I was a kid of the 70s. Look at those Peter Pan collars and disco pants. Next picture. And let's pause there, actually, because those 3 pictures of my birthday party actually is a great representation of the we and the power of the we. And I was, you know, again, in the 70s, coming off the civil rights movement. So the diversity, it might seem more normal today, but I went through a lot of challenges having such a diverse set of friends and starting to unify people and advocate for the power of the we as a child. And yeah, I'm looking at those pictures, and it was the 3 pictures, and I have some more, but it was race, it was gender, it was you know, immigrants, non-immigrants, it was even LGBTQ plus, although I didn't have the term for it back then. And it was my friend Delia was deaf. She's deaf. So it was also just, you know, diversity in every form that you can imagine. And it played in well, not realizing it. It was just natural for me for when I became older and was out there in the world working with a very diverse set of people. Next picture. So this is when I started coding as a kid. I love to say that that Christmas was the Christmas I got my Commodore 64, but I don't know for sure. But I'm coming, I think I'm in 3rd or 4th grade then, or it's elementary school, can't remember. Next picture. I know I was somewhere in elementary school just before junior high school because my mom still had her afro. And I think that was just before middle school. And so I definitely was coding and starting to code at that point. Next picture. And then my parents actually got separated. So I don't have a lot of pictures in between. But fast forward, this is me as a teenager, the first one-strap backpack. So we filed for our patent. By the time we got it, I was in my early 20s. But it wasn't that long after that picture with the Afro puff that I started really pushing the envelope. So I went to Cornell University. I was studying computer science as well as business. I started my first company. We filed for a patent. Eventually, we got that patent. Next picture. Then I went on to work on Wall Street. I took the coding that I'd learned, started teaching myself, when I was a kid, and then learned even deeper at Cornell. And that was code that was used for the largest merger in the history of the United States at the time, Manufacturers Hanover Chemical Bank. It was also the first time I got highly paid for my code, and that I stood up for myself because the guys at the investment firm tried to screw me over. Next picture. And then I pushed it even further. I moved to Japan, got one of my friends to also come with me, and laid down a foundation there. I even got my own work permit without a lawyer over in Japan, and that's my certificate of eligibility to work, as well as my bank account book. If you had any doubt I was still in my 20s, I picked a Snoopy book, but I was pushing it. Like by then I had lived in London, been to France, been to Venezuela, as well as moved to Japan. Next picture. And it was around that age that I raised the $670 million. So that is what I looked like when I was raising the money and building satellites and launching satellites and working with Nelson Mandela. Those are my braids. Next slide. That was when we signed the CNN deal. I'm in the red suit. I couldn't keep my hair as cute after a while because I was so sleep deprived, but I loved my braids. I just ran out of time with being able to get them all the time. Next slide, picture. That was me with Nelson Mandela, and I was so clever that all I had was a disposable camera with me half the time when I was traveling. So yeah, I might have been smart, but common sense, or I was just busy. So all the pictures I have with them were from disposable cameras. And then after that, you'll see the team in South Africa. So that was me on my 30th birthday with the Johannesburg team. They threw me a birthday party, and lots of diversity, lots of post-apartheid South Africa challenges. But being a child of the 70s, I had a unique experience to be able to handle it. And then next picture. That's the actual satellite that we built and launched. That's AfriStar. So that was the one that went over Africa and the Middle East. And someone had asked the question, we'll go into it deeper, but did we just launch the satellite, or was I also involved in the build? I was also involved in the build. I would spend a lot of time with Alcatel, and they were our general contractor in Toulouse, France, in the big hangar where the satellite was coming. And who was doing our mission control in Luxembourg, Ariane Espace, who was doing all the launch, handling the launch, which was also a French company. Next picture. Those are all the companies that were involved in the launch. That was our launch poster. And next picture. And then, when I was on the other side of it, I started to form into sort of what I am. My look now hasn't changed very much over the past 20 years. And you can see the next couple of pictures. leading into the final picture, which was me just before the pandemic, actually a year ago today, November 2019, on the set of a TV show called Everyday Edisons. So I wanted to start there because one of the points I made in the first session was that I was pretty ordinary, just like all of us, Afro puffs, Peter Pan collars, until I start pushing the envelope and doing some things that people thought of as extraordinary.
Tiffany, first of all, let me just thank you for sharing those pictures and telling your story in another way with a visual representation. It was so amazing to put what we already knew, what we discussed in part one, to actually see the visualization. So I just want to thank you for doing that for us. That was awesome. So I do want to go back to the satellite because a lot of the students from who engaged with us the first time around were so excited to hear that you had something to do with the satellite that went into space. So can we go deeper? I know you said that you were part of the build and they just wanted to know more about that experience and how exciting it was.
Oh yeah, it's so amazing because if you've seen the movie Hidden Figures, when I was a kid, that was when that experience with John Glenn had happened. So I watched it live, and I'd always wanted to go into space and was obsessed with space and technology, and had dreams of being an astronaut. And I still plan to do it someday, just when I'm closer to death in case something goes wrong. Since I didn't get a chance to do it when I was younger. And so I was always obsessed with space and flying. I had so prior to September 11th, I would spend a lot of time in cockpits when I was flying all over the world, and have gotten a chance to land in South Africa and London and Tokyo and Singapore, like all these really cool places. Because then, if you hadn't, I would talk to the pilots all the time, and they would invite me into the cockpit with them. Hopefully someday that can happen again for kids that are into flying. I flew on the Concorde, so that's the closest I've gotten to space in like Mach 3. So yeah, when we raised the money and I was in charge of international business development, I would be heavily involved with the build of the satellite, like working on the deal with Alcatel for them to do the satellite build. And then also visiting them a lot in Toulouse, France, and like one of those big hangars, and would be going over the project plan and sort of seeing where we were with various milestones, and the satellite would be coming to life in front of me, as well as going to Luxembourg, which is also in Europe. It's a very small city-state, and meeting with SES Astra, and running through all the specs again for mission control. And Arianes was doing the launch, so would also stop by when I would see Alcatel and meet with them and talk about the launch sequence. I wasn't, I sort of brought everything together. Like it would be doing the deals, making sure that things were going as specified in the contracts, and based on what we were paying for, doing content deals like with CNN and Bloomberg, and deals with the government. So yeah, I was very involved, and it was super, super exciting to me, especially because all of this was pre-September 11th. After September 11th, I developed this fear of flying, so I never ended up getting my pilot license, because I think it's not good to have a fear of flying and fly a plane at the same time. But I've jumped out of a lot of planes. Well, 2 planes.
Oh, wow. So you've gone skydiving?
Yeah. The first time I went, I did a solo static line jump, which I don't know if they still do. And so long story short, I jumped by myself at 3,000 feet. And with static line, you have to climb. This is why I don't know if they still do it. You have to pull yourself out of the plane and walk along the wing at 3,000 feet while the plane is flying. You're not attached to anything, and hook the line at the tip of the wing. And I was the only woman doing it that day. And when I finally got to doing it, like you have to do all this training, obviously, I realized why, because one of the hardest parts was the upper body strength of pulling myself out of a flying plane.
Oh my gosh. Oh my gosh.
Yeah.
Well, one of the things that you talked about that is still a dream of yours is to actually go into outer space. But some of our students wanted to know what's next for you. What are your more immediate dreams? What would you like to do next?
Right now, one of my top dreams, and I started it last Friday, is the Power of We tour. So I want to play a leading role in reunifying our country and the world. And so I feel like that's something I was born for. And so the next product that we're launching, and we did a soft launch on Friday at the Eclectic Convergence conference, is Unity.
I love that. I love that. So how do you stay motivated to accomplish all of your dreams?
How do I stay motivated? That's a great question, because that is the question, right? If you're motivated, you can do almost anything, learn almost anything. No, scratch. If you're motivated, you can do anything and learn anything. That little girl that you saw in those pictures, like, I never let go of her imagination. Like, I'm doing what I've always do as a kid. So even, at the defiance of my parents, even sometimes risking everything, like my home or whatever, like, not intentionally. A pandemic happens, right? And then you're like, oops. This is always what I've wanted to do. And so that is my motivation. I have a long list of things I've always wanted to do in some form, creating, innovating, unifying the world, like, leading and starting companies around the things that I invent, which, most inventors aren't also entrepreneurs. It's two different things, right? They might license or sell the technology or work at a company and invent. Traveling the world. So I'm up to 52 countries, but there's 119 of them that I want to do, and I have a spreadsheet of them. So, like, we're in track. So, like, all those things, like, there's other things that I'm not ready necessarily to share, but I have a list of things that I wanted to do since I was a kid, plus adding, and my motivation. I don't like to waste time. One of my favorite quotes of myself is, life is not the time to wait. Number one. Number two, one of my favorite quotes of myself is, regret is more painful than failure.
That is awesome. Like, regret is more painful than failure. I think that's something that we all need to hold as a truth, so that you can take these risks and go for your dreams and go for your goals and hold those true to who you are. That's amazing.
Because when you're younger, I would see so many people managing against failure, but inevitably, as you get older, the more you recognize your mortality, you start managing against regret. The secret weapon is to, as young as possible, manage against regret, not failure.
Great, thank you. So let's talk about one of the dreams that you have accomplished, which was becoming an author, writing Vote Like a Boss. So what was the inspiration there? What inspired you to become an author? So our students really want to know. So I'd love to hear a little bit more about voting like a boss. Vote like a boss.
So first off, I did it in a very entrepreneurial way because I started a publishing company and then released the first book of that publishing company, which is Vote Like a Boss. So I think part of the reason, because people have been asking me to write a book for ages about my story. But I think part of the reason why I finally did it with Vote Like a Boss was, one, the market need of getting out the vote, which I respond to very well. And the fact that I was starting a publishing company with it, because then it played to my creator skill set. Like, I love creating things and entities, and teams to go with it. And, my motivation was to get out the vote, as well as, I've always had this frustration that the narrative and the story around voting has been about politicians and political parties and elections versus looking at voting as a leadership skill. And so at the end of the day, Vote Like a Boss is a book on leadership. With it's a collection of essays around the power of we and persuasive storytelling and astounding yourself and the importance of innovation and imagination. And, oh, by the way, vote like a boss, because that is also a leadership trait, like speaking up for yourself, showing up for yourself. And last session, I think we had talked about, yeah, but, we can't vote. Would you be up for, would you support a younger voting age? And I had said yes, but also I made the point that it's not just about the voting. It's practicing your persuasion and influence. And it's no different than when you persuade someone for your iPhone 12, right? It's like, oh, why don't you hone that skill and decide, who you like for whatever reasons, and then persuade people who can vote to vote. And that's the same effect as voting.
So we actually have an audience question. I think people are impressed that you've gotten to about 50% of the countries in the world. So which country that you visited had the biggest impression on you, and why?
Okay, I have to answer it in 3 different bits because they're for different reasons, right? So England's have so many friends there, and it was the first place that I went to outside the country. So it was my first international experience and was mind-blowing. And then I'm still really good friends with the people that I met from that initial trip, which was in the 80s. And I have six godchildren there. So that's it made a strong impression, because it's like this, I have this whole second life normally there. This is the longest period of time I've gone since '87, not going back because of the pandemic. Then the second one I would say is South Africa, because apartheid had just ended. Nelson Mandela and apartheid played very heavily in my childhood and witnessing all that. And then, just like the Cold War, and being able to not only be there, but then meet him and work with him and be of service to him. So that was a real impact. The third one would be Venezuela, because it was the first time I'd been someplace where it was deep in, where I could witness real fighting. So it was in 1991 and the rise of Chavez. And so that I loved it. It was great. And it left the impact that left on me. And then since then I've been to, conflict zones and war zones. And that was before I went to South Africa. So when I went to South Africa, there was effectively a civil war going on too, for power. But that was about 5 years before. what the impression that left on me and then prepared me for other conflict zones is that when there's war, when there's conflict, people are trying to continue their lives. It's not like what you imagine in a movie or a TV show where everyone's hiding out at home. It's, people are going to school, people are going to grocery, like they're trying to continue their lives. And then next thing you know, a tank is going by or some conflict, like the fighting, comes out. Or in the case of Venezuela back then, I went to a house party with my friends, and all these like private soldiers came with us. You wouldn't even call them security because everyone had like automatic weapon, like AK, whatever. And so outside you had all these sort of people with private military and paramilitary, and inside, I love that song, or oh, he's cute. Do you think he likes me? It's like, yeah, he's told me that he was like really cute, and that's what always struck me about that. And then found that whether I was on the West Bank or post-apartheid South Africa. And then the last place I would say is Italy, because there's just something about Italy. Like I feel like I'm part Italian, or my soul is partly from there. Like I just connected. It's the language that Italian's the second language that I speak the best.
Nice. It's interesting to be thinking about living in sort of this surreal parallel universe time when you're in these war zone, war-torn countries. So thanks for like really illustrating that experience, because I almost felt like I was there with you in Venezuela, looking at that cute boy, but then there's like military hanging out outside. So that's insane. So I do want to somewhat wrap with one of the last questions that we had from our first time together, which was, who was your role model when you were their age, so when you were in middle school, and who's your role model now?
So the role models are my parents, Jesus, like as a human being, like as a leader, I found him really compelling as a role model. And in particular, that was where like my obsession with magic came, quote unquote, as in one story in the Bible in particular where Peter walked on water. Like Jesus had walked on water. If you know the story, it's usually said Jesus walks on water, right? But then for me, that's the Peter walks on water story, because Peter had gotten out of the boat, and I was like, whoa, wait a second. Like, did anyone see this? Like, no one focuses on that. And so that was also a trick. I was meant to walk on water. Like Jesus didn't come down here to show off. He was like, you're leaving so much talent on the table. Harriet Tubman, I always think if slaves had money, she would have been the first billionaire. She's social entrepreneur, great leader, operationally so tight. Leonardo da Vinci, that goes to like the spiritual stuff too. Whereas I felt he was doing all these different things to test if he could walk on water. And then when Da Vinci Code came out, I was like, told you all. And then Einstein, C squared, has been a very special equation for me as an entrepreneur.
Great. So before we close out, I would love to ask you to do Hermione Rising again, if you're okay with that.
I am actually okay with that. I'm always ready for Hermione Rising. So for those that were at the last session, the context. For those that are new to this session, Hermione Rising is a poem that's pro-imagination, pro-innovation, and pro-Hermione Granger from Harry Potter. So here we go. I imagine a better way, something disruptive and innovative, used and revered, demanded and paid for, something transformative. Imagination, why do we deny it and discount it? It's the source of all innovation. Einstein was theoretical, not applied. Da Vinci, an artist and a scientist. George Washington Carver, no vision, no hope. And Harriet, well, Harriet had to. I have a dream of traveling in space, of curing cancer, of running for office, of peace, unity, equality, and equity. You get what I'm saying? It's not about the how, it's about the why, the sense of purpose. No need to teach imagination, just endorse it. And with grace, give space for it. It's not to be packed away. It should be on display in schools and offices and Zoom gatherings, a priority among the others. Serious vote for tinkering and sketching and making and for play. Forcing memorization of someone else's prior imagination is not the way. The recipe gives space to expand and extend a concept through empathy and understanding, through diversity and collaboration, and embrace for imagination in the case of them all. The more minds that imagine together, the more innovation blossoms. The more diverse these minds, the taller it grows. And if it's fueled by love, thrives and soars. We are 7 billion strong, brothers and sisters. We can do anything unless we fight each other. Go human or go home. Daydreamers, you are our future daydreamers. Your place is at the top of the class. Take out your wand and cast a spell of I want that. And look, it'll be messy. Reality is always messy. Screw up and then rise up. Wield the magic of hope and faith. And know that the world may be for it later. Hermione is rising and her power is limitless. And by God's grace, so is yours. I pray more than ever at this moment in time, you will use it for the greater good. God believes in you. Just believe in yourself. Thanks.
Tiffany.
And yes, I do have an upstairs wand as well as my downstairs wand.
Love it. So many amazing jewels were dropped. Every time I talk to you, Tiffany, I'm always going away even more inspired than I was before. So thank you so much. I know that our audience feels the exact same way that I do. Go human or go home. Thank you all. Thank you for coming to Read to Lead Live, and we'll see you next time. Thanks again, Tiffany.
Thank you. Bye.